Borodar, and welcome to the second annual Robert Owen Day event on his 251st anniversary. My name is David Smith, and at the outset, our thanks to all participants who have made today possible, and to the Wales Cooperative Party and Scott Mid Cooperative Society for their generous financial support. We shall be recording the event for our YouTube channel. Please turn your camera on or off according to whether you wish to be seen. Sylla Ross will explain shortly how we will deal with questions and contributions via the chat box. Sadly, following recent elections, Joe Cullinane is no longer minority leader at North Ayrshire Council. Joe therefore sends his apologies since he can no longer claim to represent his authority. We have therefore reallocated his time amongst other speakers. Owen speaks globally to the hopes and struggles of people seeking to make the world a better place. Today, we seek to make a connection between then and now. In seeking to radically change society, Owen emphasizes in his 3,000 UNESCO recognized letters and pamphlets the crucial role of education in bringing about the transformation of society required, a view which we share. Hence our campaign for a national Robert Owen Day. The cooperative movement is wide and diverse, and we agree with the view of Margaret Llewellyn-Davies, a former General Secretary of the Women's Cooperative Guild, that cooperation is far more than a reformist movement. We are working for no patchwork modification of the capitalist system, she states. Community wealth building is so much more than using procurement as a tool to recycling funds within a community. It is as radical, if not more so, than the foundational economy approach in Wales, requiring a concrete analysis of the concrete situation. The cooperative and community wealth building movements are international, and their underlying principles can be found on the web. Both seek citizens, communities, and the third sector to play a greater role in ownership and control of assets within the commercial sector, with the cooperative movement perhaps placing more emphasis upon education and self-help. They both support building a democratic economy which is fair, stronger, and more sustainable. Both help to implement and support a variety of mechanisms such as community ownership, cooperatives, employee-owned firms, community land trusts, and community finance. We hope this event can help build momentum to progress both movements. It is now our pleasure to introduce a short pre-recorded welcome from Newtown's youngest ever mayor, Councillor Williams, who is on his honeymoon.
Good morning, and a big welcome to you all on behalf of the people of Newtown on this special day, Robert Owen's 250th birthday. I hope to have been with you in person or remote, but I'm currently on my honeymoon the other side of the world. Still, to this day, we recognise the importance of the values and morals instilled by Robert Owen across the UK and even the world. His achievements in approaching the issues of his time in a different manner made him a unique and influencing character. His legacy continues to live on in our society and our education system. When I was in primary school, we studied Robert Owen and visited the landmarks in our town which pay tribute to his work. With the upcoming changes to the curriculum in Wales, we again will see his work make its way into new and exciting aspects such as democracy and social values. You have some very special guests with you today, including ministers and professors, which I'm sure will give a fascinating insight into how Robert Owen's cooperative approach is still relevant today. Thank you very much.
I now introduce Dr. Cilla Ross as a facilitator for the second session. Cilla's been an excellent friend and really pleased to see you here today, Sylla. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, David, and thank you for the honour of helping to facilitate and chair this. Thanks have already been made. I think we're going to be very thankful over the forthcoming couple of hours to John Jones from Merthyr Tydfil, who's very kindly helping with all of his grants of technical support for this session. So I did want to make those thanks clear right from the beginning. For those of you who don't know me, I've been fascinated by cooperative education, and I'm no expert on Robert Owen, but passionate about what Owen meant to cooperative education. So I'm really going to enjoy the next couple of hours. In terms of the questions, can I suggest that when you ask a question, you clearly put an asterisk before that question as you post it into chat. That will differentiate a question from any comments you might also want to make. Hopefully, if we've got some time, although we're extremely tight on time, we will pick up the odd question during sessions 1 and 2, but fundamentally the larger session at the end will be the place in which we actually address those questions. For all speakers, can I just ask you to keep an eye on me? I'm going to hold up 2 minutes prior to your ending your session on that little bit of old-fashioned paper. But I just wanted to, before we move into session 1, say something very briefly, which we're all aware on this call, which is very important to think about. This session is held in the shadow of atrocities in Ukraine and in so many other places. But some of the things that we're going to learn today are, in the words of Raymond Williams, great resources of hope. For Williams, quote, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. And that is what Owen sought to do in his time and what so many cooperators seek to do today. So I just wanted to frame it by that other extraordinary Welsh person, Raymond Williams. So on to session 1. And this is actually divided into 2 sessions. We've got 3 speakers, and our first speaker is Professor Chris Williams, who's head of the College of Arts, Celtic Studies and Social Sciences and Professor of History at the University College Cork in Ireland. He's a magnificent expert on Robert Owen, has written widely on him and on his legacy, and it gives us great pleasure to ask Chris to begin this 2-hour session today. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Sylla. That's very kind of you. I'm going to hopefully share my screen. Please, I hope that's visible. Can somebody not yet? Great. It's always a terrific fear of mine that you're talking to a blank screen or something like that. Anyway, you're very kind. I'm not sure if I'm that much of a magnificent scholar, to be honest, of Robert Owen. It's been part of my work that I've really enjoyed, I have to say, and it's a great pleasure to join you today. So I'm going to speak briefly on building on Robert Owen's cooperative legacy, looking at 2 historical examples from Robert Owen's own times of attempts by ordinary men and women to advance the principles of cooperation within a capitalist society. Now, Owen himself was not as intimately connected with either venture as he was with some others, but as the publication Cooperative Miscellany noted, his ideas were a general inspiration for these and other ambitious schemes. The magazine wrote, "Steps are actively moving onwards towards the diffusion of the views of Mr. Owen, which are now generally known as the principles of cooperation. These principles breathe universal love of our fellow beings, industry among all classes, equality of privileges for all the human race, peace and goodwill to all mankind, the equal distribution of labour and wealth, and universal knowledge and happiness." Now, the first venture I want to draw attention to was the National Equitable Labour Exchange, which was opened in 1832 in Gray's Inn Road in London. The idea of a labour exchange at this time was predicated on the assumption that workers deserved to reap the entire rewards of their labour without the intervention of middlemen such as masters, wholesalers, vendors, and other intermediaries. A labour exchange instead would offer the facility whereby goods could be valued by the labour that had gone into them and could be exchanged for other goods, bypassing the capitalist market system. This was a bit more sophisticated than a barter system because it needed a system of labour notes, a kind of alternative currency. And here is a labour note from the National Equitable Labour Exchange. So craftsmen could exchange their goods for a labour note, and they could then retain that note until the time it was needed to purchase another item. Interestingly, this note is from the Birmingham branch because there was a Birmingham Labour Exchange as well as the one in London. Now, this system appealed to artisans, cabinet makers, carpenters, shoemakers, people who by and large didn't need very much in the way of capital or machinery in order to produce the goods that they did. And the whole movement launched in September 1832. It was launched, as I say, in this rather splendid building on Gray's Inn Road. Robert Owen already had established in this building his brilliantly named Institution of the Industrious Classes for Removing Ignorance and Poverty by Education and Beneficial Employment. This had been a horse and carriage repository, and you can see the central courtyard. There was an open gallery on the first story and the large assembly room. And Owen did this up. There was a platform so that they could have balls, lectures, and festivals. Tradesmen brought their goods to the exchange. A committee valued the goods and charged a small commission on each article that was deposited, and there was an entrance fee to become a member. And it attracted a great deal of attention. And in fact, it was so successful that there were a number of branches of it set up, as I say, one in Birmingham, others in London. So for a while, roughly about 2 years, I suppose, this was a very flourishing movement. Owen became quite excited by it and said that equitable labour exchanges were the bridge over which society would pass to a new and better world. And the labour exchange became a centre of all sorts of cultural and political debate and social activity. And we have this very vivid memoir from Alan Davenport, the radical writer from the 1860s of the National Equitable Labour Exchange. And Davenport says the public mind was completely electrified by this new and extraordinary movement. The Great Assembly Room, originally fitted up in the most elegant style, this is of course typical of Robert Owen, the ceiling was magnificently embossed and the ornamental parts richly gilded with gold, capacious enough to hold 2,000 individuals. But this was not sufficient to satisfy Mr. Owen's ideas of beauty. A splendid platform was raised on which was placed a superb and majestic organ. On festival nights, the avenues were brilliantly illuminated with costly Grecian lamps. 10 or a dozen musical instruments were employed and gentlemen sung, ladies and gentlemen sung to the sweetest airs. The festivals were opened with a short lecture on the subjects of social love, universal charity, and the advantages of cooperation. Incidentally, often it was Owen who gave the lecture. The lecture was followed by a concert, the concert by a ball. So you get a sense of the grandiosity of this initiative and the excitement that surrounded it. As Alan Davenport says, every avenue to the exchange was literally blocked up by the crowds of people that constantly assembled, some attracted by the novelty of the institution, some to watch its progress, some to make deposits and exchanges. But alas, it was soon discovered that the beautiful labour notes could not by any means be forced into general circulation, on which account the supply of provision failed, and a complete failure was the result of one of the most extraordinary movements that was ever attempted in this or in any other country. Now, the weakness of the National Labour Exchange was that really the movement was limited to handicraftsmen, artisans, and you couldn't get food there, you couldn't really get clothing there. So it was a very limited circulation system, and also the labour notes themselves remained tied to current market values. So again, really, this, although there was an attempt to sort of set up a separate economic sphere, it was only partially successful. There were other problems. People, I think, probably brought goods they couldn't sell elsewhere to the labour exchange. There were complaints that the wives of members actually didn't like the idea of only shopping in one store. And eventually, by late 1833, really, the movement had begun to collapse. The legacy of it was, however, that it fed into the Grand National Consolidated Trades Union, because a number of trades associations had become very interested in the labour exchange and organising their members to become involved with it. And of course, they then fed into the GNCTU. The second Owenite venture I want to draw attention to is actually the very different Owenite community that was established at Garnlwyd in Carmarthenshire. Now, this was in the wake of the collapse of Harmony Hall. There's a picture of Harmony Hall, the last mainstream Owenite community in Britain. And after Harmony Hall, Garnlwyd became the only Owenite community that was around. Now, here's a map. I'm not sure if my cursor is visible, but if you can see my cursor there, it's circling the existing farm of Garnlwyd in Carmarthenshire. It's a rather dated Ordnance Survey map, I'm afraid. This was a farm, 220 acres, 90 acres were under cultivation, and it was bought with a mortgage by the Leeds Redemption Society from a sympathetic landowner, a Mr. Williams, incidentally, who had been in America and who was interested in Owenite ideas. The Leeds Redemption Society was a flourishing society based in Leeds in Yorkshire, hundreds of members there, quite a few outside Yorkshire. It had its own journal, the Herald of Redemption, and its objective was to replace capital and labour with a socialist commonwealth of labouring capitalists. So they bought Garnlwyd in 1848. They spent a lot of money improving the estate, and they established not only farming there, but also shoemaking. There were certainly plans to establish tailoring and hat making, and the goods that they produced were then shipped back to the Leeds Redemption Society's cooperative store, which opened in 1851. And you could buy Carmarthenshire butter, Carmarthenshire cheese, and Carmarthenshire blackberry jam in Leeds. I've got a couple of photographs of the farm as it was when I visited it some years ago. As you can see, it's not a large farm. That's the farmhouse, and you can see the farm buildings. And that's a view across the valley from the south. It's a working farm to this day, which suggests that it was a realistic project for the Owenite movement, unlike some other Owenite communities which have completely vanished. And actually it enjoyed quite a significant longevity. It was in existence until maybe 1854. Eventually the costs of the mortgage were too great for the Leeds Redemption Society, but it attracted a number of people. And here is what the 1851 census tells us was the residents of Garnlwyd on census night in that year, as you can see, all with one exception there from outside Wales. A significant community in the sense, I think, that it bridges the community building phase of Owenite cooperation and the storekeeping phase, you might say, that followed. So those are the two examples I've provided this morning of enterprises from Owen's own time of trying, I suppose, to come up with inventive ways of establishing cooperative principles within the context of the existing capitalist society. And as our time is up, I will shut up talking now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was an excellent start in this first section where we're thinking about Robert Owen as pioneer of community wealth building as well as so much else. Thank you, Chris. That was really fantastic. Got lots of questions. We're running a bit behind, so we're not going to be able to address those until section 3. But now I have great pleasure in introducing two of my ex-colleagues, Gillian Lonergan and Ms. McIvor. Gillian is they're both going to spend a couple of minutes addressing a particular question, which I'll leave them to introduce. But just very briefly, Gillian, who retired in 2019, obviously had a career as a librarian for the Cooperative Union, now Cooperatives UK, the Cooperative College and the Cooperative Heritage Trust. Gillian is a chartered librarian, qualified archivist and fellow of the Society of Indexers, and everybody who is a cooperator knows Gillian. So over to you, Gillian. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. A couple of minutes first and then I'll move to Liz.
I will be brief, though, having spent my entire working life alongside the Robert Owen collection in the National Cooperative Archive. I can go on at some length, I'm afraid. But one of the things that I find fascinating about Owen is his approach to people and to communities. And I think you can sum that up. I was intrigued by the bit in the Cooperative Miscellany talking about universal love, because one of the key things that Owen had was a respect for people and kindness. It's always struck me that when he first became a manager, people asked him, how will you change things? What will you do? And he said, I won't change anything. I will spend a month observing, going around, talking to all the workforce, because they know more about the business than I do. And when I've gathered all those ideas together, I will have an idea of what I want to do in the future. And that struck me as really important. And you see it again and again in everything he did. Engaging people, talking to people, making sure that the workforce really got involved in what they were doing. At New Lanark, he was famous for going around and finding natural leaders within the workforce. And he actually got them together, explained to them what he wanted to do, how he wanted to improve conditions and things. And then he got them to go out and talk to the rest of the workers, making sure that everybody knew what was going on, and to get feedback, to get everybody to make comments about what was going on, what was being done. He might well not take up the ideas that people were going along with, but I think the important thing is that he listened to what was said and considered it, and he gave that respect to people both within the workforce and within the community outside, because he recognised that any organisation is part of its community and you need to get the community involved in it as well. So I think those are the things that really strike me about Owen and his approach to people. And I'll shut up.
Thank you so much, Gillian. And, indicating that sort of that increasing democratic type of leadership and ownership, which we've gone full circle towards now. Thank you. Now, Liz, I'll introduce you, if I may, and then we're going to come back together to have a more informal chat about some of these themes. So Liz is Trust Manager and Lead of Cooperative Heritage Trust, CIO, a social historian based in the northwest of England, and an absolute expert, no doubt on her, but also on canals. So welcome, Liz. Really nice to see you. Your 2 minutes start now.
Thanks, Sylla. I will confess straight away to not being anywhere near an expert on Robert Owen, but I suppose what part of my interest, of my involvement in this is about kind of making the links, because that's what we in kind of museums and heritage are there to do. We can't tell the whole story. What we can do is try to contextualize a little bit. So for context, I'm sat behind an open display case at Rochdale Pioneers Museum with our own 2 Robert Owen exhibits. And that is the speaker's cap, Robert Owen's cap, his thinking cap. And it might be hard to see on the screen, but a printing block for a labour exchange note, which of course we've slightly touched on. These are the physical remnants. There are very few physical remnants, obviously, of even famous people like Robert Owen. But really what our task is, our role is to try to get people to make the links between Owen's ideas, the sort of kickstarters of what we would now recognise to be the way the cooperative movement developed. And to sort of explain really that the cooperative movement isn't any one person or any one group's responsibility, that it's a collective approach to radical change. and that actually some of the radical change makers out there in the world today have their roots in the history, the heritage of the cooperative movement. And of course, it doesn't even start with Robert Owen himself. You know, Owen is a proponent, a thinker, a speaker. I suppose you'd say, well, an idealist, certainly, but a change maker. Even if he didn't get to see all of those changes happen in his own time. I think now, if we were talking about community wealth building, that pluralism of economy, financial power locally, he would still be a supporter of that, as long as it was married with education, opportunity, voices for ordinary people.
Thank you so much, Liz. Really interesting comments. Can I just ask, before I open up to Gillian and possibly Chris Williams, if he's there and wants to join us, what was the speaker's cap?
Oh, yes.
How was it used? Don't know.
So it's a velvet cap. It was really common in the 18th century, up to the early 19th century, for gentlemen to wear hats indoors. So although, you know, you'd be seen outside with full, you know, kind of regalia, the soft hats, like caps, were often to keep you warm, keep you comfortable in houses that didn't have any form of central heating. Even fires don't distribute heat evenly around a room. So most people, especially if they're sitting in one place and writing, would get quite cold and get kind of creaky. So men, particularly older men, tended to wear these soft hats indoors. And this is the idea of being spoken to, if you like. If you listen to a lecture, you're being spoken to from the fireside, that somebody who's an intellectual, who's a thinker, would be seen in a hat like that and would deliver addresses, you know, wearing something like that. It's supposed to confer a sense of intellectualism and intimacy, rather than appearing in a, you know, kind of top hat and full coattails, which is more common with a politician.
Thanks so much, Jill. That's really informative. Thank you very much. Now, I mean, anything that's been said either by Gillian, Chris or Liz, anything you want to respond to each other about in some of the things that you've heard?
Could I just, sorry.
Go on.
Well, I absolutely endorse what Gillian said, I think, about Robert Owen's character, that this idea of kindness, of idealism, in a world, you know, of his time, the 1810s, 20s, 30s, and so on, which was very highly stratified by class and social position, more so, I would say, than our society today. You know, you have a number of testimonies suggesting that he spoke to people with great respect, notwithstanding their economic and social position. And of course, he was, in many respects, a flawed idealist, and he wasn't a brilliant organizer and so on. But I think one of his enduring characteristics, and it's important not to lose sight of, is exactly what Julian has highlighted there, that his respect for all individuals and his desire to see social improvement. So, you know, I think that's really important.
Thanks, Chris. And I guess we can think about the values when we think about that kindness as well. Liz, you were going to say something.
Yeah, it's just this idea of, particularly around approach to leadership, that the context that Owen was operating in, even when he had support, not just from his partners, but also from some of his workforce. I think it's really interesting to think about how difficult it is now to get workforces on board with, you know, kind of holistic change and, if you like, taking self-responsibility to its zenith, to be part of not just having change done to you, but being part of progressive change. That's hard enough now for working communities, because there are, inequalities, even in any workplace, even in cooperatives. There are challenges around personal relationships, around, this idea of who's doing more, who's doing less, who's able to do more, making equity and equality, real characteristics in the workplace. And that's often what we sort of see in the communities, the Owenite communities, that some people feel that they're doing more work or that their labour is more valuable than other people's. And it's really, really difficult to establish a sense of equity. And I think he was obviously quite frustrated in even trying to start that off in Lanark. It took years before people really understood his motivations.
Thanks, Liz. Gillian, did you have any comment you'd like to make?
I was just going to say, it's always struck me that he didn't come from money. You know, his father was a saddler and owned a shop in Newtown. So he was a skilled worker and would have been respected in the town as a shop owner. But he didn't come from money. And Owen's working life started as an apprentice in a haberdasher's shop. You know, everybody's beck and call, running around and probably never being listened to when he came up with ideas. And even at the age of 14, 15, he would have been coming up with ideas, being Owen. You know, and I always think that background probably helped him in recognizing how much people could contribute to businesses when they were just working on the shop floor. You know, that I think that actually helped him as a background. I don't think it made his speeches much easier to understand, because he was coming up with so many ideas that his lectures were quite difficult to listen to, apparently, because they're just coming at you. But that background, I think, would really have helped him.
Thank you, Gillian. I just get this sort of notion of like what Gramsci called an organic intellectual, you know, someone absolutely intellectually curious and just full of ideas, which is wonderful. We're running out of time, but I have got one more question just in the chat for Chris about the labour exchange, Chris. Were women involved in the labour exchange? And I don't know if you know, or Liz or Gillian might help out if not.
Well, perhaps Gillian and Liz would know. I'm not sure there were many female artisans who took goods to the labour exchange. I'm not sure we've got any records of that. There were certainly women involved in the social and the educational dimensions of the labour exchanges. So they were very much open to men and women, and you know, there were even sort of schools associated with them. And the comment about the wives of labour exchange members not wanting to do all their shopping there, that's from, you know, the literature of the time. I'm not sure what role that played exactly in the failure of the enterprise, but so perhaps Gillian or Liz would know a bit more.
The only comment I've got is that some commentators, not at the time, but after the fact, you know, reviewers and historians, trying to pick apart why labour exchanges didn't take off, you know, either in other cities or outside of an urban context. The obvious thing being that female labour is so undervalued, you know, even today, that actually, you know, there wouldn't have been much incentive, particularly in places like Birmingham, where a lot of the artisan jobs were male dominated. And in Lancashire, where there's a, you know, huge female textile workforce, you know, that's a massively undervalued trade compared to the male part of the industries. So that is probably one of the reasons. Gillian, I don't know if you can add anything into that.
The only other thing I would add is that, yes, I mean, women's input is difficult because they had so much other stuff that they had to do and all the rest of it. But there's also within society at the time, and right the way through to the 1880s, when the Women's Guild was set up within the co-op movement, women were not expected to get up and say things in meetings. You know, women were seen but not heard, and you took your life into your hands if you did it. You know, you were not expected to do it. So I think it's the social expectation, it's the financial problems of getting involved and that sort of thing. But can I throw in one side issue, but also on women. There is a thing in the Robert Owen Museum, which is a series of silhouettes of Owen's principal followers and publicisers and all the rest of it. And it's got these beautiful silhouettes, very, very 19th century. Half of them are female, half of them are male. Owen had a lot of female following, and it's always struck me as interesting. You don't see it very much, but they were there and they were involved.
Commented on occasionally, but it's often a side note, isn't it? Like female followers being evicted from Queenswood and being sort of dragged out into the street with their children clinging to them, you know, because it gives that sense of pathos, that sense of it's not individuals but families, that it's a community. You don't have a community without women and children. So that's a really good point.
Thank you. And on that note, and as is always the case, we've got Liz, Gillian and Chris, and as historians we could just keep going all day. But can I thank you very much indeed for helping to sort of offer this context of this extraordinary pioneering community and social engagement from Robert Owen, and thank you so much. It's absolutely brilliant. There's lots of questions which will come up no doubt in section 3, but thanks so much, and really great session. Thank you.